Hello, welcome to this presentation for the Royal Horticultural Society's Level 3 Certificate in Practical Horticulture. Here we're on topic 8, which looks at landscaping materials and is presented by Mike Roberts. In this presentation we'll be looking at element 3, which concerns the planning of new hard landscaping features. For this element, for the knowledge component, you'll need to know about the factors when planning a new hard landscape feature, and these need to include accessibility, function, site limitations, levels, materials, aesthetics, maintenance, complexity of construction, as well as cost, carbon footprint and environmental impact. For the application outcome, you'll be planning the installation of a new hard landscape feature using the aforementioned points. And for integration, we need to consider or assess the impact of a new hard landscape feature on other garden areas. So all in all, this is quite a big element. As an introduction, in this element you're asked to consider the factors involved in planning a new hard landscape feature, and these could include hard surfaces such as paths, seating areas, terraces, car parks and driveways, structures such as raised beds or pergolas and archways. Might also include boundary structures to include walls and fences. So there's quite a lot of scope here for looking at hard landscape structures and features, more than we can cope with in just one presentation. So here we'll concentrate on the planning of hard landscape surfaces, but bear in mind many of the factors involved can also be applied to other features. So we'll start working our way down the list as indicated on the syllabus. And we'll start off with accessibility. Paths and paved surfaces must be accessible for garden visitors, goes without saying. This means consideration of the material, the gradients and the dimensions of the area. Some examples for paths. For a one-person path in a garden, for example, a minimum of 60 centimetres would be comfortable, although 1 metre would be preferable. To allow 2 people to comfortably walk side by side, a minimum of 1.2 metres, and again 2 metres, the more generous we can be, the more comfortable it's going to be. Where wheelchair access might be a priority, a 1.5 metre wide path is the minimum, and this allows for a wheelchair plus 1 pedestrian alongside. Again, where space permits, we could go wider than this to make it more accessible. Under the Equality Act 2010, organisations must take reasonable steps to remove physical barriers that make it difficult or impossible for disabled people to use facilities. This could involve installing ramps, lifts or making doorways wider. So this is a really important factor to bear in mind, particularly if we're designing for a public space. Function. A fundamental question when planning a hard landscape surface is to consider its function. What's it going to be used for? The function will dictate many design and construction decisions, including choice of material and the robustness of the construction method. So for some examples, in a garden situation, a bark path is suitable for light occasional use, but wouldn't be suitable for any more heavy traffic or for anyone using a wheelchair or trying to push a pushchair along it. In those sort of situations, a harder wearing surface would be needed, such as can be shown here with a tarmac path. More robust construction still will be needed if we require vehicular access. And for seating areas and other areas of leisure in a garden, these should be visually appealing, as well as of generous proportion. Site limitations. Before any work can begin, an overall assessment of the site has to be carried out. This would be the common practice with any design work, and we've dealt with site analysis or site evaluation in previous topics. But this time we need to look more specifically at how the work can be done. For example, will there be room to take a digger or a mini digger onto the site for excavations? Will you need a skip on site, or will the contractor take waste away? If you need a skip, will it have to be on the roadway, in which case you may need permission or warning signs and lights, or if it's on a driveway where you can park safely and without obstructing road sightlines while your drive is occupied. Where can the contractors or subcontractors park? Health and safety executive requirements mean that workers need access to toilet facilities. If they don't have access to the house and the project will go on for more than a week, you or the contractor may need to arrange for portable toilet facilities. Where could this be sited? Are there existing features that could affect construction? For example, protected trees, listed buildings? Is the area in a conservation area? Are there any protected species on site? So all of these practicalities will need to be considered when you're planning your feature. Levels and levelling are a crucial aspect of landscape design that affects the functionality, aesthetics and long-term success of outdoor spaces. Whether it's for water drainage, structural stability, visual appeal or plant health, proper land grading optimises the potential of the site. To create usable areas on a sloping site, the following may be required: retaining walls, steps, ramps. So a detailed level survey will be required so that features can be planned accurately. It can be quite deceptive. Many sites that look relatively flat on conducting a level survey can reveal quite a fall across the land, resulting in the need for unexpected steps or raised beds or other structures. So it always pays to pay attention to the levels on a site. Linked to levels are gradients. The gradient or slope of a paved surface is the relationship between the change in vertical height and the distance over which the change takes place. Gradients are usually expressed as a ratio, hence a 1 in 100 gradient means there's going to be a 1 metre level change over a 100 metre distance, or a 1 centimetre level change over a 1 metre distance. The gradient of a path or paved surface needs to be suitable for the uses of the area. So a path for a reasonably fit individual could be as great as 1 in 10. Whereas for wheelchair users, their access requires a much gentler slope, generally around 1 in 20, although steeper gradients can be acceptable over a short distance. Again, if you are designing for wheelchair access and you are having to deal with the gradient, it would be worth looking into this in much greater detail to make sure that it is truly accessible. Seating areas, such as patios, should have a gradient of around 1 to 50 or 1 to 70. They don't need to be completely flat, and indeed this would be impractical as the area wouldn't shed water. It also depends on the material that you'll be constructing your paved area from, as some materials are better at shedding water than others at shallow gradients. So either way, combined with levels, we need to get a good indication of what the gradients are doing on our site to make sure that we can plan our features appropriately. Fundamental concern is going to be the material that we make our feature out of. The range of materials available for hard surfaces in particular is vast, and choice of material will be based on the use and function of the feature, see earlier slides. The cost, consider the prime cost of buying the actual material, but also the incidentals of the cost of installation. The aesthetic qualities of the material, we'll discuss that in more detail later. Durability, how well the material will stand up to general wear and tear and how long it might last. And maintenance requirements. Flexibility is an important consideration, and this really refers to the ability of a material to form complex shapes or cope with changes in level. Some materials, like paving slabs, could be considered to be quite inflexible. They'll require a lot of cutting, particularly to fit into unusual organic shapes, whereas other flexible materials include things like gravel, tarmac, concrete, which can flow into just about any shape you might envisage. They can also cope with some subtle changes of level better than an inflexible material like natural stone or concrete slabs. So we've said that the range of materials for surfacing is vast. Without going into too much detail, they might include natural stone, precast concrete slabs. These now look very effective and come in a wide range of different colours, styles and textures, and come at a fraction of the cost of natural stone. Porcelain slabs are very on vogue and on trend and suit modern gardens. Don't be deceived by the name, it sounds very fragile, but porcelain is actually a very hard wearing material, and not only can it be used for surfaces, it can also be used to clad walls and raised beds. Small unit paving is very flexible, can be used over large areas, and is traditionally used for driveways, paths, parking areas, etc. You'll no doubt have seen small unit paving used in municipal areas and in your local supermarket or garage forecourt. Sets and cobbles, again small unit paving but can be very decorative, and the variety of laying patterns, colours, sizes, textures can really enhance an area and allow it to become a design feature in its own right. Gravels and chippings are generally much cheaper. They're a very flexible material, and although they may not be the most exciting, they can be a temporary stopgap while you save up for a more expensive paving. They can be a good unifying material in a garden, but they do have their disadvantages. The gravel can kick around and get into lawns and borders, and it gradually wears away and needs to be replaced. In situ concrete. Concrete has a bit of a bad press. It can look very boring, and when it's not laid correctly can become a bit of an eyesore. However, laid correctly, whether it's just plain or imprinted or textured, concrete can be a good solution to creating flexible areas of different shapes, and also enhanced with different finishes can really enhance an area quite well. Similarly, utilitarian bitmac or asphalt, again used in public spaces, can appear rather boring, but is practical. In a warming climate, bitmac could pose problems that in very hot summers it can become flexible and start to melt. Although we're used to seeing the traditional black tarmac, other colours are available, and it can even be painted to make it look more attractive. We mentioned previously gravel and chippings have the disadvantage that they can kick around and get into lawns and borders. An option here may be to have resin-bound gravel, where the gravel or aggregate is mixed with the resin to form a solid surface. This gives the look of gravel or chippings, but without the disadvantage of materials kicking around. Modern versions of resin-bound materials can also be permeable, allowing water to drain through. Modular cells are widely used in parking areas. These can be of plastic or concrete construction, and the cellular nature allows the cells to be filled with soil, in which case you might want to seed over to create a grass area, or to be filled in with gravel. And the advantage here is that the cells retain the gravel, even on a slight slope, and don't allow it to kick around as much as if it was freely laid. And lastly, various textured pavings. These are useful for blind or partially sighted people, or where a change of use is envisaged. You may often have seen these on pavements at the approach to a level crossing. So just a couple of case studies when looking at different materials. So natural stone, lots of different options available here. York stone, sandstone, marble, slate, granite. Advantages here is that they're very aesthetically pleasing. It's a prestige material, generally of high cost. So the high cost is obviously a limitation where you're on a tight budget. It can also be quite an inflexible material. These are usually rectangular or square slabs. They'll require cutting if you want to fit them into a more unusual shape. Surfaces can become slippery. Sandstone, particularly the more porous types of sandstone, can absorb water on the surface, and this leads to algae or moss growth, which can make them even more slippery. Highly polished surfaces such as marble and granite can be quite dangerous. So the application for natural stone: domestic gardens, patios, seating areas, and very prestige areas. In contrast, small unit paving, this could include concrete or brick pavers. Advantages here are that they are very hard wearing. It's a very flexible material, so it can be made into lots of different shaped areas, can fit into awkward shapes as well. Can cope with some changes of level. Modern varieties of small unit paving can be made permeable to allow for water to drain through, and they have a medium cost compared with natural stone. Cost will largely depend on the use of the area and what needs to go underneath. So a block paved area for a vehicular access, or parking area where you're going to be parking a number of heavy vehicles, might need to have a concrete subbase. Limitations: can have a rather utilitarian appearance, and used over a larger area can be a bit dull and boring. An application: public spaces, vehicular access, for example driveways. Well, next look at aesthetics. So a well-designed feature is one that combines both form and function. Function includes the practical issues that we've discussed previously, such as cost, durability and suitability for use, whereas form deals with more aesthetic concerns such as colour, shape, texture and overall style. We'll consider these in a little bit more detail. So first of all, scale. This has to do with the size and shape of a material, and it should be in proportion to the surroundings of the feature. So for example, 90 cm by 60 cm slabs can look rather too big for a small garden patio. Block paving, on the other hand, can be uninteresting, especially over large areas. So consider the size of individual materials and how they'll fit into the size and shape of the feature you want to create. In addition to this, the size of paths, patios and driveways should look proportionate to the area, but also be functional. So in a large garden, a small seating area can look rather too small and mean, but in a small garden, a huge area of patio looks way too out of scale, as in the bottom picture on the screen at the moment. The style of the material. Consider how the feature or material will fit in with the overall style or theme of the garden. In a well-designed garden, all the features and materials look as though they need to belong together to create a feeling of unity. So in traditional designs, a natural stone material with a riven edge and laid in a random pattern may fit the style rather more better than very modern materials. In more modern contemporary designs, we might be looking for more crisp, clean edges, a smoother surface, and here porcelain paving or sawn natural stone, concrete or even metal might suit this style better. Materials are available in all sorts of different colours these days to suit our colour themes, and colours of material should complement the overall colour scheme of the garden. Lighter colours can make an area appear larger, but we also need to consider the aspect of the area. Light colours reflect the sun and can dazzle in open areas. That's going to clearly be an issue with the garden shown in the top photograph on our slide. In contrast, dark colours absorb heat and can become very hot. Texture. The surface texture of a material can be an attractive feature and add to its aesthetic appeal. Where a range of materials are being used, contrast between rough and smooth texture can be very effective. This change in texture can also help blind or partially sighted visitors navigate around an area by giving sensory clues to their location. It can often be a good idea to mix materials together in a garden to create interest. The number of materials that you use will depend largely on the size of the area, but also the aesthetic properties of colour, texture, size, etc. In the photograph we've got on the screen at the moment, there's a pleasing mix of materials, different textures, but with harmonising colours. So the overall effect is quite pleasing, it doesn't look too bitty. In contrast, in the bottom picture, we've here got a confusing mix of colours, textures and styles, with the overall result that the effect looks rather confusing and chaotic. Maintenance. When planning a new hard landscape feature, it's important to consider what maintenance will be necessary and to factor in the cost. In a previous element, we've considered maintenance of hard landscape features in greater detail, but just as a summary, timber can be prone to rot and will require regular treatment. Consider using modern composite materials instead. Natural stone with a porous surface can attract algal growth, particularly in shade. Gravel and chippings harbour debris and weed seedlings. Frequent raking and weed treatment will be required. So as mentioned, maintenance of hard landscape features is considered in more detail in Topic 8, Element 2. Thinking next about the complexity of construction. Complexity will obviously add to the cost of a project. So when planning, consider the need for excavation and levelling, foundations and subbases, any services that might be required, electricity, water, drainage, and also the level of skill required. Will the project require specialist services? So the picture on the screen is an impressive paved area with a water feature. There are a lot of complicated precision cuts required for the installation of that feature, which would be technically difficult to achieve, as well as potentially wasteful in respect of materials. Now, there's nothing wrong with this feature. It's very attractive, and as long as we can justify the cost, it will make a very good feature for a garden or landscape area. So we're not saying don't do ambitious things, but just bear in mind the complexity of the construction when you're at the planning stage. This leads us on to cost. Cost will usually be a significant factor in the planning of any hard landscape feature, unless you've won the lottery or your boss has got an enormous budget. So we'll need to consider the prime cost of materials. So this is actual materials that you're buying. So for surfaces, this would include the cost of the paving, the subbase, any membranes, sand, cement or fixings that you might need. We'll also need to factor in machinery hire. Do we need to hire a digger, cutters, compactors, cement mixers? We might need to hire a skip, or we might need for arisings to be removed from site. What's the labour going to be? Is this going to be in-house labour or specialist contractors? Even if it's in-house labour, this is going to come with a cost if you're diverting those workers from other jobs. Is this going to be a short-term project or a long-term one that you can do bit by bit over a longer time? Cheap materials might be an option to reduce costs in the short term, and quick installation may result in short lifespan and the need for early replacement or repair. So an initial high cost could be more cost effective over the longer term. We might need to think of ways to keep costs down, particularly if we're on a tight budget. So simplify the design. Don't make it unnecessarily complex, as we were discussing earlier. Make a wise, careful selection of materials. Avoid waste. Precision calculation of quantities. Spend time at the planning stage calculating how much of a material you need so you don't make wasteful decisions. Try and source materials locally so that you don't have to pay excessive transport costs. Wherever possible, reuse, repurpose and recycle. Have a good look around what's already on site. If you're ripping out an existing area of paving to replace it with something else, can you make use of the building waste as a hardcore? Can excavated soil be used elsewhere on site rather than carting it away? And what reclaimed materials could we use? If we're considering equipment, we need to make a decision perhaps whether to buy or hire. If our project's going to be over the longer term, it may be cheaper to buy, use and then sell rather than put something on long-term hire. Environmental impact is particularly important these days, so we need to consider here the carbon footprint of materials. Concrete products have a very high carbon footprint due to the energy-intensive manufacturing process. Transport, locally sourced materials are likely to have a lower carbon footprint than those imported from overseas. Sustainability. Natural stone, sand, gravel, hardcore are extracted from the ground. This makes them a finite resource and potentially damaging to natural landscapes in their extraction. Are there any alternatives? Timber products use only FSC, Forestry Stewardship Council certified products to avoid damage to forests and woodlands. Consider the local environment. Consider the effect of your feature on biodiversity, habitat loss from installation of new hard landscaping or new landscape features. Consider the water runoff from new areas of paving. What will this do to surrounding areas? What will it do to environmental flooding? So when we're planning new landscape features, particularly paved areas, we want to make sure that our areas are SUDS compliant. Something that you may not think about, but there are ethical considerations to landscape planning as well. Issues here with materials manufacture include the use of child labour, particularly those materials that are imported from the subcontinent. The use of bonded labour is widespread, whereby labourers are tied to a particular employer and find it very difficult to move away. There may be no minimum wage and considerable unsafe working practices. There may be discrimination in the workplace and excessive working hours. All of these can be an issue, so it's worth looking out for material suppliers that sign up to ethical trading initiatives. So, having considered some of the factors to do with planning landscape features, your task in this element will be to plan the installation. You'll be provided with an area to plan and a hard landscape feature, for example a new patio, driveway, path, etc. In most instances, you'd want to start by measuring the site to produce a survey plan drawn to scale. This will allow you to sketch the new feature to make sure it's in the correct location and is the right size and shape for its intended use. The sketch plan will make it easier to calculate the quantity of materials you'll require, which we'll be covering in the next element. You can then start to refine the details of a new feature by considering the criteria discussed in this element. You'll be provided with a pro forma for you to complete. And you may also start researching the construction of your feature, and this will enable you to calculate all the materials you need in the next element. So, finally, for the integration part of the element, we need to assess the impact of a new hard landscape feature on other garden areas. In summary, construction of new hard landscaping will have impacts on nearby garden features both during construction and following completion. Any new feature should be planned with its effect on surrounding areas in mind. These might include aesthetics. How will the new feature integrate into the existing garden theme or style? No feature should be planned in isolation. Doing so can lead to a mishmash of features which bear no relationship to the overall garden, and the resulting chaotic image won't be visually pleasing. So think about whether the overall garden style is formal or informal, modern or traditional. Drainage. Will water draining from the feature affect nearby garden areas, leading to localised flooding or waterlogging? For example, if we were building a patio in a garden and the water drains away towards a lawn, is this going to make the lawn very waterlogged during the winter or during periods of heavy rainfall? What effect will the feature have on the microclimate? So, with examples, light. Any vertical features such as walls or fences may shade existing garden areas which were formerly in full sun. This will obviously have an effect on the plants that are already there. Wind. New walls and fences can divert wind, creating either sheltered areas or areas of turbulence. Thinking about existing plants, paving over the root zone of an existing tree can have long-term consequences for its health. Impermeable paving will cut down on oxygen and water entering the soil and thus affecting the roots of the tree. In the example shown on the screen, a new driveway has been designed to avoid the root zone around the tree, whilst the cellular confinement system provides a firm, porous surface without the need for a deep subbase. Although a flowing, curving path may look aesthetically pleasing, the impact on adjacent areas can be considerable. Dynamic curving paths can lead to corner cutting and damage to planting or grass. This is often referred to as a desire line and can be avoided at the planning stage by thinking about where people need to walk and what access is required. Paths that are too narrow may result in visitors stepping onto adjacent areas, causing damage to grass or trampling plants. So in public spaces, make sure that paths are wide enough for several people to walk side by side or pass each other without having to step on the side. So that brings us to the end of this presentation. Further information as normal in your course notes. You'll be required to plan a hard landscape feature for an area as we've described in this element. And looking forward, in Topic 8, Element 4, we'll be looking at the calculation of materials for a landscape project. So, I hope you've enjoyed this element. Thank you for listening, and look forward to seeing you again in the next one. So this is Mike Roberts saying goodbye for now. Bye-bye.